listening to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and more. Here's your host, KickedTripod.
Good morning, Overwatch League fans. This is your Overwatch League daily episode for January 12th, 2018. Today I'm joined by Jake Zenox Brander to discuss last night's matches. On Wednesday, we finally got to see the Overwatch League regular season become a reality, and then yesterday we got to see even more as all 12 teams have completed their first match. For the first match of the evening, we had Profit and the Spitfire take on Tvik and the Florida Mayhem. This match looked to be a tame one going into the second day, as most expected London, one of the league favorites, to make quick work of the Mayhem. In the preseason, we saw Florida struggle at every position and level of play, going 0-2 against the Shock and the Fuel. On the flip side, most stayed optimistic that despite a lukewarm preseason showing, the Spitfire would still come out strong in their regular season debut. The Mayhem came out swinging on Dorado as London got caught on their heels. Swoosh looked comfortable on Winston, and Logix had a performance reminiscent of the glory days with Movistar Riders. The Mayhem end up taking Dorado and a 1-0 lead against the Spitfire. However, that would be the last map Florida would win, as Profit and the Spitfire would cruise past the Mayhem, winning the series 3-1. The most anticipated match of the evening was that of fan favorites Houston Outlaws taking on the untested Philadelphia Fusion. Between visa issues, missing the preseason, and a strong preseason from Houston, not many expected the Fusion to go far in this match. However, Philadelphia contested or outplayed the Outlaws at every position. Fraggy and Poco were stunning in the tank roles, and they were consistently able to harass Houston's backline. Boombox regularly outplayed Raucus at Zenyatta, and Carpe would have one of the most impressive DPS showings that we've seen yet this week. For the Fusion, it wasn't a matter of if they were going to be good, but instead it was a matter of when they would kick it into gear. Philadelphia fans will be pleased with this performance as the Fusion take down the Outlaws 3-2. As they did with the preseason, the Outlaws struggled to put up consistent performances throughout the lineup. On Dorado, the Outlaws looked particularly outmatched. Jake, what happened?
Hey John, whilst the Outlaws definitely struggled a little bit on Dorado, I'd have to say the reason for this was them not being able to deal with Philly's relentless pressure and the sheer damage output from Carpe and Shadowburn. Defensively, the Outlaws weren't horrible. I mean, a 39-second time bank for Philly isn't exactly a fast-paced record, and something the Outlaws should have pretty much achieved themselves, if not better. It was ultimately the Outlaws' poor offense that was the most disappointing factor for them. Whilst Jake was able to shift Carpe off of Tracer and onto Widow for the second stage of the offensive attack of Outlaws by playing Pharah, he wasn't able to then switch to Genji quick enough to really capitalize on that switch due to an extended team fight that had just taken place after he was able to switch Carpe off. And Carpe was still actually getting quite a few kills on the Widowmaker as well, even more minimalizing the effect of getting Carpe off his so deadly Tracer. I think ultimately, though, it just felt like the Outlaws really wanted to take Philly head on and lost the DPS battle between Carpe and Shadowburn and, of course, Jake and Linksa, who Carpe and Shadowburn quite heavily overshadowed Jake and Linksa throughout Dorado, and maybe next time I think Outlaws might have some different strategies to combat the Tracer Genji combination that the Philadelphia Fusion were able to utilize so effectively.
I mean, I think you're right. I definitely think that Carpe and Shadowburn definitely outplayed Jake and Linksa, but do you think that Jake and Linksa played poorly overall?
They were heavily outclassed by Carpe and Shadowburn for much of the series, and they weren't able to have the same sort of impact that Carpe and Shadowburn were having. In saying that, though, they weren't horrible by any means and showed their versatile hero pools, which did keep the series close on maps where Carpe and Shadowburn's Tracer Genji combination wasn't as effective, such as Horizon Lunar Colony, which is why probably the map was a very quick win for the Outlaws. But on control point maps is where they really struggled. Jake losing out to Shadowburn, for example, in the Farajewels on Oasis is a little bit of a disappointment, considering that, you know, Shadowburn's a Genji main by nature, and yet he's still a really good Pharah, but you'd expect Jake to come out on top in that duel. Linksa also having pretty much no impact at all on Lijiang Tower in what was the series deciding map in the end to see who would actually win the series 3-2. I am very intrigued though to see how Jake and Linksa perform in their next match, which I am quite confident, or at least quietly confident, they will bounce back, and as the season goes on, we'll see why this Houston Outlaws lineup was so highly rated, especially Jake and Linksa.
In the end, we got to finally see a match go to 5 maps, which is not something that we've seen quite yet. I don't think people really expected this to be the match and the maps that we would see go to 5, but it did. In your opinion, if you were going to hand out that MVP trophy for this match, who would you give it to?
It definitely was a close series that could have gone either way, and in the end, Philadelphia won. And for me, the biggest factor for that was Carpe and Shadowburn. But if I had to choose an MVP for the match, it definitely would have to go to Carpe. His Tracer was just incredible. There was no stopping him at all. He was also still able to flex over to the McCree at certain points throughout the series and still show his full capabilities there. So definitely a huge factor in the series and a reason why Philadelphia came on top in the end. Definitely, Shadowburn was great. There's no doubt in that. Definitely could have been MVP as well, but if I have to pick one, it goes to Carpe.
Let's transition to the New York Excelsior versus the Boston Uprising. They had Zenox for this one, which they didn't have for the preseason. People were really looking forward to see him. A lot of people were expecting a pretty hefty blowout. Instead, the Boston Uprising came up and actually put on a little bit of a clinic on Horizon Lunar Colony. But after that, we were able to see Sabiolbi and Zenox and one of my favorites, Pine on Ilios, really do some work. And despite a strong showing from the Boston Uprising, it was still very clear that the Boston Uprising were playing a team that were out of their league. But at the end of the day, Boston has clearly shown that they have the ability to compete in this league. In your opinion, who are the difference makers on this Boston Uprising squad?
I believe Striker and Gamzu are definitely the standout difference makers for the Boston Uprising, but not really to the degree that some other teams have in terms of difference makers. The Boston Uprising really feels like a core group of evenly talented players, which does make them a solid overall team, but not necessarily enough firepower may be there to have a shot at winning the inaugural season of the Overwatch League. I do feel like the game on Ilios really highlighted the need for possibly a second star DPS to play alongside Striker if Boston are to compete against the best of the best. Dream Casper is a decent player, but honestly speaking, if I was Boston, I'd be making a pretty big offer to Pine, who is currently on the bench for New York. Imagine a Pine and Striker combination. I mean, that's just some spooky stuff. New York is an incredible team, though, and Boston were able to put up a solid fight in the series, even though they ultimately lost 3-1. They shouldn't be too disappointed with their performance as a team. Striker and Gamzu as the standout difference makers for Boston are definitely going to be the highlighted players throughout the season.
In the preseason, we didn't get to see any of Zenox. He was underage at the time, so he wasn't able to compete, but he's of age now. So we got to see a first look of a New York Excelsior squad at full strength. How do you think Zenox did in this match?
I thought Zenox played extremely well for New York on his debut, especially, of course, on his Zenyatta that he's definitely known for, but I just want to touch on the fact that he brought out the Bastion on Junkertown, which was amazing to see. He certainly had the upper hand over Neko for the entire series, and well and truly lived up to the hype that was put on him coming into his debut. It was never going to be easy to just come into a roster like New York Excelsior and just make a name for yourself straight away, and he was able to achieve that, and he was also able to show us his vast hero pool by playing Moira on Lunar Colony, able to pull out the Bastion, as I mentioned before, and we know he can play Ana and other support heroes as well. Definitely a great trait that Zenox has going forward. With more time in the Overwatch League, we know he'll continue to get even better, and a duel that I just definitely can't wait to see is the matchup against Ryuji Hong. The battle of the Zenyatas, the battle of the amazing supports. Can he take out the best of the best? Time will tell, and it's a matchup that I can't wait to see. But in terms of Zenox's future in the Overwatch League, he's got a well and truly bright future. Great debut, more to come.
During the preseason, we saw a pretty lukewarm performance from Sabiolbi. However, it seemed that he addressed most of those issues during this past month of practice, maybe Zenox being there, maybe being able to have a little bit of the pressure off of him as Libero really played well overall. What changes did you see from the preseason to now from Sabiolbi?
I think the biggest change that I saw from Sabiolbi from his preseason performance to his performance against Boston was that he brought out more versatility, more than some may have believed that he had. As he showed in the match against Boston, he was well and truly happy to play a lot more Widowmaker and a lot of McCree, and not become reliant on his incredible tracer that he is well and truly known for. When Pine came in on Ilios, Sabiolbe didn't really have to be the focal point of attack for New York, and obviously that can then take away a lot of pressure off the shoulders of Sabiolbe. I still don't think he played at his best though, and honestly that just highlights how amazing a player that he really is. I'd love to see him play more with Pine in the future, as I think that more synergy they can create together, the more likelihood that they can become the best duo DPS pair in the entire league. Definitely though, expect Sabiolbe to continue to improve. This man is not even close to his peak yet. Watch out.
I'm glad you brought up Pine, because Pine was totally hyped this match. Between dabbing on the stage and dancing, he obviously is a crowd favorite, but he also put on a clinic on McCree, maybe one of the most dominant McCree performances we've ever seen in competitive Overwatch. How do you think the New York Excelsior should utilize him in the future? Do you think he's still best used as kind of this substitute or kind of pinch hitter for the New York Excelsior squad?
Well, firstly, I don't think it can be overstated just how well Pine played on Ilios. I mean, that was probably one of the most dominant performances single-handedly that I've seen, especially in the Overwatch League. That's got to be the biggest standout so far to start off the inaugural season. If you haven't actually gone and seen that, for those who are listening, please go and watch Pine play on Ilios against the Boston Uprising. It was absolutely magnificent to watch, and it does go to show just why New York need to utilize him way more in the future, and I'm sure they will, especially after today. They definitely will play him on more maps at different points, and just because he's a sub doesn't necessarily mean he won't play. This is not going to be the case that Libero is the starting player 100% of the time. Barring some catastrophe, then Pine comes in. No, Pine and Libero will swap around on different maps throughout the inaugural season, and we'll be seeing plenty of both of them. But as the season goes on, I do believe he should pretty much force his way into that starting lineup and actually put Libero into the sub position the longer that the season goes on. I'm sure that will happen. Pine is just too good, and especially considering that these players are on one-year contracts. If after this season or after this year, Pine is not quite in the starting lineup, there will be a lot, and I mean a lot, of teams who will want to sign this guy.
My thanks to Zenox for stopping by on the show today. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at ZenoxOW. Tomorrow I'm going to be joined by Bradford Ross. He is a coach formerly for Splice and Mega Esports. He's going to be joining me to discuss tomorrow's matches. Speaking of tomorrow's matches, starting at 4 p.m. Pacific time, we've got the Los Angeles Valiant taking on the Dallas Fuel. Then at 6, we've got the Florida Mayhem taking on the Boston Uprising. And then finally at the 8 p.m. match, we've got the San Francisco Shock taking on the Shanghai Dragons. Might be a little bit more tame for those second two matches, but it should be an interesting one nevertheless. Remember, you can find this show on any of your favorite podcast outlets, including iTunes, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, and Google Podcasts. We're also on the front page of winstonslab.com. We're also on YouTube. Click on the link in the show notes to find us. If you want to stay in touch, email me at overwatchleaguedaily@gmail.com, tweet me at OWLDailyShow, or join our Discord at discord.me/OWLDailyShow. If that's too much to remember, just go to overwatchleaguedaily.com. We've got everything right there, links to everything straight from our website, wherever you need to go, wherever you need to download us. We're going to be back tomorrow for another, yes, that's right, another episode of Overwatch League Daily. So make sure to come back in tomorrow, subscribe on YouTube, hit that subscribe button in iTunes. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much. We'll see you tomorrow.